So, Haley?
Number 14 on the homework, please.
14, sure. So the directions for 14 say find the exact value without using your calculator. And this is cosine of 2 arc sine 1/2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by focusing on this part, actually specifically this part, and I'm going to ignore the 2 for a moment. So this is the same thing as saying that arc sine and sine inverse are the same thing, right? And by the definition of an inverse, I know that this is the same thing as saying sine theta equals 1/2. I know that sine is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. I know sine inverse is going to give me an answer in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. So the place that I want here is quadrant 1. So I'll go to my unit circle. Looking in quadrant 1 for the place where the y coordinate is 1/2, I'm going to read off that angle. So far, so good? Okay. So now I have cosine of 2 times pi over 6. 2 times pi over 6 becomes pi over 3. And now I'm going to go to my unit circle and find the value for cosine of pi over 3. So I go to my unit circle. Pi over 3 is here, and I want the x coordinate, which is 1/2. And I'm done. Does that feel okay?
Yeah.
Yep. So the 2 is kind of freaky looking in there,
Yeah.
but it's no big deal. We're just going to multiply it by whatever the answer we get out of from the inverse there. So, okay. Teresa? Sure. (15) says tan inverse of 1.3, and I want my answer between pi and 3 pi over 2. Okay? So this is basically saying tan inverse of 1.3, and we know that this is equivalent of, or to saying tan theta is equal to 1.3. Elizabeth? I went to the unit circle and looked up the value for cosine of pi over 3. Okay. Okay. So tangent we know is positive in quadrant 1 or quadrant 3. Everybody agree with that? This interval here, if I think about that, pi is here and 3 pi over 2 is here. So this interval that we're looking at is also quadrant 3. Is that okay with you so far, Teresa? So the angle that I'm looking for is this one. Okay with that? To find that angle, I'm going to find this little piece here, I'm going to call that phi. So I can say then theta is going to equal pi plus phi. You okay with that reasoning? So now the question is just finding this little angle phi. So phi is just going to be the absolute value of tan inverse of 1.3. So I'll just go to my calculator and do tan inverse of 1.3 and just take the positive result. If my calculator went, there it goes. So tan inverse of 1.3 is 0.915. And if I add that to pi, I get 4.057. And that's the answer that we're looking for. So I did maybe a little bit more explaining than maybe I needed to there. But the key here is kind of this drawing, right? It's figuring out what quadrant does your answer need to lie in, and then figure out how that inverse is going to be related to the answer, whether we're going to be adding or subtracting based on where it is in the picture. Does that feel okay, Teresa? You're welcome. Kristen? Mm-hmm. It can be, yes. I mean, you can do other things too, but that's not a wrong thing to do. It's to retrieve a value from the unit circle. Because we're asking for an exact answer, that the value will be something on the unit circle. You could do it other ways, but that'll certainly work. So there's, like in problem number 15, it specifies what quadrant it wants the answer, what quadrants the answer can come from. If that's not given to you though, like 1 through 14, you're not given a quadrant. What we're going to be using is from the notes on the 19th, the inverse functions all have specific quadrants in which they output. So because of the way that we defined what sine inverse, cosine inverse, and tangent inverse does, they each have a specific range of outputs that they'll give you, which corresponds to like quadrant 1 and 4, or 1 and 2, etc. So that's built into those inverse functions. And that's something that you'd be well served to memorize, right? That's important information. You'd want to remember that. Josh. Number one? Sure. So number one says find the exact value. So what I would do is I would start with writing my inverse function and equivalent sine function. Now sine inverse always give me an answer in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. Sine is positive in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. So when I go to my unit circle, I'm wanting to look in quadrant 1. Is that okay? So I'm going to go to the unit circle looking in quadrant 1 for where the y coordinate, because we have a sine function here, is square root 3 over 2. So I found that here. So the answer that I want is pi over 3. And I'm done. Does that feel okay? Okay. At this point, are you guys good to work on stuff and you'll just find your individual questions as you go? Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording then.